He didn't wear a tie or an expensive suit. But when Muhammad Ali walked into a room, even presidents fell silent. What few know is that behind the ring, the greatest boxer of all time secretly met with kings, artists, and politicians. Meetings that were never made public and that changed the course of history. Muhammad Ali was more than a champion. He was a force of nature, a blend of faith, provocation, and charisma that made him impossible to ignore. While many saw him simply as the man who felled giants inside the ring, few knew how much he did outside of it. Behind the scenes, Ali was an improvised diplomat, a messenger of peace who conferred with leaders and artists in meetings that defied the logic of the time. Behind the scenes, Ali was sought out by politicians who wanted to understand the power of his influence, by artists who saw in him a reflection of freedom, and by religious leaders who recognized in him something almost divine, the ability to inspire multitudes with words alone. He was the bridge between worlds that should never meet the elite and the people, power and faith, fame and humanity. These secret meetings took place in quiet mansions, at private dinners, and at press-free trips. In one, Ali spoke for hours with a president about ending the war. In another, he moved a Hollywood star to tears. He didn't bring bodyguards, didn't ask for cameras, and didn't seek applause. He just listened, because what he truly wanted was to understand the world he was trying so hard to change. Today, these stories are beginning to emerge from the shadows. Forgotten letters, testimonies, and secrets reveal an Ali the public never knew, the man who traded punches for ideas and silence for transformation. This is the portrait of a hero who, even outside the ring, continued to fight, but this time, with words, looks, and gestures that have stood the test of time. The year was 1973. Muhammad Ali had already regained his belt, and his image, previously tarnished by his refusal to fight in Vietnam, was now a symbol of global courage. Meanwhile, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was going through a turbulent time. His brilliance was still there, but behind the Las Vegas lights lay a weary man, surrounded by sycophants and longing for the time when singing was an act of passion, not obligation. It was at this time that their paths crossed silently, away from fans and the press. In a private suite at the Hilton International, Ali arrived with his usual charisma, wearing a light suit and a smile that dominated the room. Elvis sat waiting for him, his gaze heavy and his body tense. The champion entered, and within seconds, the mood changed. "King Ali," said, extending his hand. Elvis responded with a half-smile. "The only king here is you, champion." They laughed. But behind the laughter lay a deep respect to men who knew what it was like to be both idolized and lonely. For over 2 hours, they talked about fame, racism, faith, and exhaustion. Elvis said he felt like a prisoner of his own success, while Ali calmly spoke about how he found peace in religion and purpose in representing something greater than himself. "The world sees you as a myth, but you have to remember who you are when the lights go out," Ali said, with the calm of a man who had faced his own downfall. Elvis fell silent. The words echoed at the end of the conversation. Ali pulled a small gift from his pocket, a custom-made gold belt for Elvis, emblazoned with the words "For the King," from the champion. Elvis truly smiled for the first time that night. "You know, Ali, sometimes I wish I could be like your fight, fall, get up, and still listen to your heart," he confessed. Ali looked at him intently and replied, "You already do that, only with music." That night, two different icons recognized each other as equals. There were no photos, no journalists, just two weary souls talking about the price of being legends. As Ali left the room, Elvis hugged him and said, "Keep fighting, because you fight for all of us." And Ali replied, in a low voice, before disappearing down the hall, "And you, keep singing, because the world needs to believe that beauty still exists." At that moment, the boxer and the singer ceased to be myths. They were just two men trying not to lose themselves in their own greatness, and the silence that followed that conversation was worth more than any applause. It was a cold night in 1964, and Muhammad Ali was still known as Cassius Clay. He had just become world champion by defeating Sonny Liston, and the entire world was beginning to bow before his charismatic arrogance. But away from the cameras and flashbulbs, he was about to enter an encounter that would forever change his worldview. An encounter that would place him between two giants of the civil rights struggle, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., two men with opposing ideas but the same desire, to free black people from oppression. The venue was discreet, a small room in the back of a New York church. The meeting wasn't on any official agenda. It was the kind of conversation the government feared, the kind the press could never know about. Malcolm X arrived first, with his sharp gaze and firm presence. He wore a dark overcoat and carried the weight of someone who already knew he was being watched. Shortly after, Martin Luther King entered. With a restrained smile, he greeted everyone with a gentle handshake. They're young, strong, and full of brilliance. He seemed like a bolt of lightning between two silent thunders. Cassius, Malcolm said, you have the chance to be more than a fighter. You can be a voice, a symbol. The world listens to you, even when it tries to silence you. Ollie looked at him with respect. I want to fight Malcolm, but I don't know which to fight first. Or fear. King intervened with a pastor's serenity. The fight is the same, my brother, but the weapon is different. I use love. He uses words, and you use your fists. The important thing is not to let hate defeat either of us. The conversation stretched into the early hours of the morning. They discussed religion, politics, faith, and destiny. Malcolm X believed in separation and racial pride. King preached unity and forgiveness. And Ollie, there in the middle, listened silently, trying to understand where his soul fit in. He saw the pain of both. Malcolm persecuted by his own people, King threatened by those who called him a traitor. Both knew they would be sacrificed by the same system that pretended to hear their voices. You're both right, Ollie said, breaking the silence. But I've learned that the world doesn't understand fine words or sermons. It understands courage. And courage is getting hit, falling, and still getting up. It's keeping on believing even when everyone says it's over. Malcolm smiled. King bowed his head and made a prayer sign before they parted. Malcolm leaned closer to Ali and whispered, they're going to try to use you, Cassius. Don't let them turn you into a puppet for white people to watch. Remember, you belong to your people. King, on the other hand, held Ali's hand and said tenderly, fight for all, not just some, because true freedom is when the enemy also kneels in peace. Months later, Ali would convert to Islam and change his name to Muhammad Ali, a decision that divided the country, but was born from that night. The forbidden conversation shaped the man he would become, a symbol of unwavering faith and human resilience. And while time took Malcolm and King, assassinated for what they believed in, Ali remained standing, alone, but aware that he carried the weight of both in his heart. In an interview years later, he said with a trembling voice, one taught me to fight, the other taught me to forgive, and I learned that the true champion is the one who fights with the spirit. And that's why, to this day, when we talk about Muhammad Ali, we're not just talking about a boxer, we're talking about a man who had the courage to sit between the fire and faith and emerge with his soul ablaze. If you believe that courage and empathy can still change the world, leave your like, subscribe and comment, I fight too, so that Ollie's voice never fades away. It was a sultry night in Beverly Hills in 1976. The city lights shimmered like jewels on the hot asphalt, and inside an Italian restaurant closed to the public, three men shared a table that seemed to glow with history. Muhammad Ali, Frank Sinatra, and Sammy Davis Jr., three living legends. Three different worlds united by something invisible, the fight against prejudice and the price of fame. No one outside that room knew this dinner was going to happen. It was a gathering without cameras, without publicists, without spotlights, just three weary souls, trying to remember who they were behind the masks the world forced them to wear. Ollie arrived first, with the same magnetism that always accompanied him. A broad smile, a warm greeting, and that look that made any room spin around him. Sinatra appeared soon after, elegant in an impeccable dark blue suit, carrying an air of quiet authority. Sammy Davis Jr., the last to arrive, exuded energy, with his shiny suit and the restless manner of someone who always felt he had something to prove to everyone. The conversation began lightly, with laughter about concerts, fights, and headlines. But as the wine was poured, the tone changed. Sinatra looked at Ollie and said seriously, you're the only man who can silence a crowd without saying a word. I've sung for kings, but you speak to the people. Sammy nodded, but his gaze was distant. He had faced years of racism in Hollywood, being the only black person in Sinatra's famous Rat Pack. People applaud me on stage, but they still look at me with contempt at the hotel. He vented. Ollie listened in silence, and then responded with the calm of someone bearing invisible scars. They fear you, Sammy, not for who you are, but for what you represent, freedom. And freedom is what power fears most. Sinatra set his glass down and added, and that's why they try to divide us, because when a black voice and a white voice sing together, the world listens. The conversation deepened. They discussed religion, racism, and loneliness. Sinatra confessed that he feared being remembered only as a singer and not as the man who tried to open doors. Power respects me, Ali, but it never loved me, and I don't know if I want respect without love. The champion replied with a gentle smile, Love and respect never went hand in hand at the top. Frank, up there, the air is too thin for the heart to breathe. There was a long silence. Sammy looked at the two of them and said, the three of us have become symbols, but we've forgotten that we're human too, and that's why the world demands so much of us. Ali then stood up, raised his glass, and toasted, to those who fall but rise again, to those who sing but cry, to those who fight, even when no one's watching. Sinatra smiled, and Sammy followed suit with a look of emotion. In that moment, the entire restaurant seemed to freeze. Three men from different worlds, connected by a simple truth: they all paid dearly to become eternal. At the end of the night, Sinatra handed Ollie an old photograph of the two of them, taken in Las Vegas years earlier, and wrote on the back, to the champion who fights in and out of the ring, with respect, Frank. Sammy hugged Ali and whispered, you are what we all wish we could be free. Ali replied with a serene smile, freedom is expensive, my friend, and sometimes it costs your soul. They parted without promises, but with the feeling that they had shared something sacred. That dinner was never photographed, but years later, Sinatra would confess to a journalist that it was one of the most human nights of his life. And as the city lights dimmed, Muhammad Ali drove back to his hotel in silence. In the car mirror, he saw his own reflection and murmured, they sing with their voices, I sing with my fists. But, in the end, we all just want to be heard. That night proved that true encounters don't happen in front of cameras, they happen when myths stop being gods. And remember, they are still men. The year was 1996. The world was no longer the same, and neither was Muhammad Ali. The champion's body trembled with the progression of Parkinson, but his mind was still sharp, his soul still aflame with the desire to understand the world. When the private plane landed in Havana, amidst the thick heat and the sweet smell of tobacco, no one could have imagined what was about to happen. The Cuban government maintained total secrecy. Muhammad Ali, the man who had defied American presidents and religious dictators, was there to meet one of the most controversial and imposing leaders in modern history, Fidel Castro. The news was never officially released. The visit took place in an atmosphere of absolute secrecy. Only 3 people accompanied Ali: his translator, an aide, and a close friend who helped him cope with his tremors. When he entered the Palace of the Revolution, Fidel was waiting for him, standing in his impeccable olive-green uniform, an unlit cigar between his fingers. The meeting began with a firm handshake, and a curious silence fell over the room. The dictator, accustomed to seeing men falter before him, observed Ali carefully, but the champion didn't look away. You're the only American I truly respect, Fidel said, with a smile that blended irony and admiration. Ali didn't answer immediately. He sat down slowly, studying the Cuban leader's face. Respect is something you earn when you fight for the people, he replied, his voice low and measured. But fighting for the people isn't the same as arresting them. The room grew tense. His aides glanced at each other, but Fidel merely laughed. You sound like a revolutionary, Ali, and every revolutionary is a dangerous dreamer. For nearly 3 hours, the two discussed topics rarely discussed in interviews: racism, religion, poverty, and the hypocrisy of world powers. Ali criticized the way the United States treated black and Muslim people. Fidel, in contrast, spoke about how Cuba challenged American imperialism, but at a certain point, the conversation took an unexpected turn. Ali asked, is it worth winning if it means silencing others? Fidel responded with rare candor, sometimes, freedom needs to be protected from itself. The silence that followed was heavy. Ali looked at him and said, I was imprisoned for not fighting in a war I didn't believe in. I learned that freedom can't be protected by fear. Fidel, if you have to imprison someone to defend the truth, perhaps the truth isn't as strong as you think. Fidel, surprised, let out a brief laugh. You speak like a poet, but you think like a warrior, Ali simply replied. And you, like a man who has forgotten what it's like to listen to his own heart. Despite their differences, there was respect between them. Fidel stood, lit a cigar, and offered one to Ali, who declined with a smile. I already have enough of it killing me inside. The dictator approached, placed his hand on his shoulder, and said, the world admires you because you fear nothing, not even the truth. And Ali replied, and they fear you because I speak it. Before leaving, Fidel walked him to the door. If I had your charisma, I would have changed the whole world, he said. There, already tired, he looked at the leader and replied, if I had your power, I would have freed my people. It was the last time they saw each other. There were no photos, no records, only the echo of two ideologies that clashed in silence, with neither winners nor losers. On the flight back to the United States, Ali remained silent for hours, staring out the window at the dark sea. One of his companions asked him what he thought of Fidel. Ollie replied with a trembling voice, "He has power, but no peace, and the man without peace is the weakest of all." That trip was never officially recorded, but it became one of the most fascinating and mysterious stories of Muhammad Ali's life. It was proof that, even when his body no longer obeyed, the champion's mind still defied empires with the same courage that made him face men, governments, and time itself. That day, Muhammad Ali showed that he was still the same warrior he had always been, the man who believed that true revolution does not begin with weapons, but with the truth spoken in a low voice, in a hall where even power trembled for a moment. It was 2002, and Muhammad Ali was already a shadow of the giant who had enchanted the world. His steps were slow, his hands trembled, and his voice, once thunderous, was now a drawn-out whisper. But there was still something in his eyes that no illness could extinguish, the flame of conscience. That year, an invitation would take him to Washington for a private meeting with then U.S. President George W. Bush. Amid the turmoil of the war on terror, it was a conversation that would never be announced, but whose impact would echo forever. The meeting between the champion, who refused to fight in an unjust war, and the man who had just started another. The hall was small, decorated with portraits of national heroes. Ali entered accompanied by his daughter Hannah and 2 aides. The president greeted him with visible respect, but also with a certain discomfort. After all, he was face to face with someone who symbolized the exact opposite of his policies. "It's an honor to have you here, champion," Bush said, trying to hide his nervousness. Ali simply nodded, keeping his gaze fixed. There was a prolonged, almost awkward silence. Then, with effort, he spoke. "A champion is someone who fights for what they believe in, not for who's in charge." The sentence fell like a stone in the room. The president took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. "I understand what you mean," he replied, "but sometimes duty demands difficult decisions." Ali, his voice weak, retorted, "Difficult decisions are the ones that save lives, not the ones that take them." The Bush aide tried to change the subject, but the president held up his hand, asking to be allowed to continue. There was something in Ollie's trembling gaze that completely disarmed him. For nearly 40 minutes, they talked about faith, fear, and power. Bush spoke about terrorism, security, and justice. There, he responded about love, humanity, and forgiveness. "Fear is the most dangerous enemy, Mr. President. It makes people destroy what they don't understand." The president, silent, simply observed that weakened body, yet imbued with a dignity that no disease could erase. At one point, Ali asked to be alone with him. Everyone laughed. Then, looking the president directly in the eye, he said in a barely audible voice, "The world doesn't need more soldiers. It needs more brave hearts." Bush didn't respond. He just lowered his head, took a deep breath, and murmured, "Maybe you're right." When the meeting ended, the president walked Ollie to the door. Before leaving, the champion turned and, with visible effort, raised his trembling right hand in greeting. "I've won many fights, but the hardest is to continue believing that humanity can still change." Bush extended his hand, and Ollie took it firmly. It was at that moment that, according to one of the security guards present, the president discreetly turned and wiped away a tear. The press only captured a cold, formal public photo. No one knew what had been said. But for Ollie, that meeting was his last great battle. As he left the White House, he whispered to his daughter, "Today I saw the fear of a powerful man, and I realized that even power trembles before the truth." In the following years, Muhammad Ali withdrew from the world, living amidst memories and silence. However, his words continued to echo in speeches, documentaries, and hearts. He proved that true power lies not in fists, nor in weapons, but in the courage to keep one's soul intact in the face of injustice. In 2016, as the world mourned his passing, leaders, artists, and millions of anonymous people united in a common sentiment that as long as men like Ollie exist, humanity will still have hope, because he fought not for medals, nor for applause. He fought to remind the world of a simple but forgotten truth, that love and conscience are the only weapons capable of winning any war. "I am the greatest, not because I defeated men, but because I never let fear defeat me."